The crisp Sunday morning air usually brought peace. Not that day. That day, it carried the weight of 1,000 eyes, burning into our backs as we were ushered out, ejected from God's house. My name is Michael. This story isn't just mine, though. It belongs to my mother, Eleanor, and my father, David, and my little sister, Maya. It belongs to every black family who ever felt like a trespasser in spaces meant for everyone. Mother always said Sundays was sacred, a chance to reset, a chance to connect. She adored the old hymns, the sense of community. Even though we hadn't been to this church, Hope Springs Revival, in years, she felt a pull, a longing for something she'd lost. "It's time, children," she'd said that morning, her voice soft but firm. "Time we tried again." Father had hesitated. He knew the world. He knew its sharp edges. But he loved Mother. And so, we dressed in our best. Maya in a cream-lace dress, looking like an angel. Me in a crisp suit, feeling a bit out of place, truthfully. My parents radiating quiet dignity. The church itself was grand. Towering stained glass windows, a steeple that scraped the sky. Inside, the polished pews gleamed. The air smelled of old wood and lilies. We were a little late, slipping in, as the choir's final notes faded. A man, portly and stern, met us at the entrance to the main sanctuary. He wore a dark suit, a name tag declaring him Usher, Mr. Henderson. His eyes swept over us, lingering a fraction too long on Father's slightly faded suit, on Maya's braided hair, on my sneakers that I thought were well hidden under my trousers. "May I help you?" His voice was not welcoming. It was a challenge. "We're here for service," Mother replied, her voice gentle. "Looking for a place to sit?" Mr. Henderson frowned. "Do you have a reservation?" We exchanged confused glances. A reservation? For church? Father started to speak, a low rumble of annoyance in his throat, but Mother placed a hand on his arm, a silent signal. "No, sir," she said, her smile unwavering. "We didn't know one was needed." Mr. Henderson's gaze hardened. "This is a private service. Invited guests only." The sanctuary was half empty, rows upon rows of vacant pews stretched out before us. The absurdity of it was suffocating. "But the doors were open," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone. A few heads turned, white faces mostly, some curious, some openly disapproving. The music was starting again, a quiet organ prelude. The pastor was walking to the pulpit. The moment was amplifying. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave," Mr. Henderson insisted, his voice now louder, firmer. "You're disrupting the sanctity of the service." "We're not disrupting anything," Father said, his voice rising, a tremor of controlled anger. "We are simply trying to worship." "There are other churches," Mr. Henderson said, his chin high. "Perhaps more accommodating ones." The implication hung in the air, thick and foul. "Other churches for people like you." A gasp escaped Maya. Her little face crumpled. The shame hit me like a physical blow. To be told you don't belong, not by accident, but by design. To be told you are unwelcome in a place of supposed universal love. Mother's smile vanished. Her eyes, usually so warm, turned to steel. She looked at Mr. Henderson, then at the half-empty pews, then at the pastor, who had just cleared his throat, ready to begin his sermon. The pastor hadn't even glanced our way. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, a sound that always meant trouble was brewing beneath her calm exterior. "Are you truly asking us to leave?" "I am." Mr. Henderson puffed out his chest. "Now please, before I'm forced to call security." Security. For a black family trying to sit in church. The humiliation was complete. It wasn't just about the church anymore. It was about being seen as a threat, as an intruder, as less than. Father gripped my shoulder, a silent message of restraint. His jaw was tight. Maya was openly sobbing now, clinging to Mother's hand. Very well, Mother said, her voice surprisingly steady. She took Maya's hand, then turned to us. Let's go. We turned our backs, walking slowly, each step an agony of public disgrace. The hushed whispers followed us. The stares felt like physical jabs. My cheeks burned. I could feel Father's tension, a coiled spring ready to snap. As we reached the heavy oak doors, just before stepping back into the cleansing Sunday air, Mother stopped. She didn't look back at Mr. Henderson. She looked directly at the altar, at the pastor who was now beginning his first prayer. A deep breath, a quiet determination set on her face, a different kind of steel. This wasn't the steel of defeat. This was the steel of a plan forming, an unspoken promise of reckoning. "This isn't over," she murmured, her voice barely audible, but I felt the weight of her words deep in my bones. Not by a long shot. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, cutting off the organ music, cutting off the indifferent faces, cutting off the false sanctity of Hope Springs revival. We stood on the sidewalk, the bright sun suddenly feeling cold. Mother squeezed Maya's hand, then ours. Her eyes, still radiating that quiet, formidable resolve, held a secret that promised to shake the very foundations of that grand, unwelcoming building. The usher's words hung in the air, a cold, heavy stone. They settled over us, crushing the light from the stained glass windows. My mother, usually so vibrant, so full of grace, seemed to shrink for a single agonizing second. It was just a flicker, a brief dip of her head. Then she straightened. Her spine became a rod of steel. But I saw it. That tiny tremor, that vulnerable moment before the mask of strength returned. I saw the shame, not for us, but for them. For the house of God that had become a house of judgment. My little sister, Maya, clutched my hand tighter. Her eyes, wide and tearful, darted around the sanctuary. The hushed whispers had grown louder. A sea of faces, some curious, some openly hostile, some merely indifferent, watched us. We were a spectacle, a dark stain on their pristine Sunday morning. My father, ever the calm protector, placed a hand gently on my mother's back. A silent question, a promise of support. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed forward, toward the main aisle, toward the exit, a long, lonely path. We began to move, slowly, each step an eternity. The squeak of our shoes on the polished floor seemed amplified. Every cough, every rustle of a hymn book felt like a deliberate insult. I kept my head down, but my ears burned. I could feel the heat of their stares, burning holes into my back. This wasn't just a church. This was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place my mother had spoken of with such reverence, a place where she had poured her heart, her energy, her dreams. I remembered her late nights, the blueprints spread across our dining room table, the calls, the meetings, the endless proposals. She'd always said, God's house should be open to all, a beacon of hope, not a fortress of exclusion. Her words, vibrant and full of conviction, now echoed mockingly in my mind. She had spent years building something beautiful, not just a building, but a community, a vision of warmth and acceptance. She'd often brought me along to the construction site, the smell of fresh lumber, the clang of hammers, the rising walls. She'd point to where the altar would be, where the pews would sit. Her eyes would sparkle with a faith so profound it felt tangible. "This will be a place for everyone, son," she'd said, her hand resting on my shoulder. "No matter their color, their past, their struggles. a true home. And now, here we were, being escorted out of that very home, her home, our home, by a man whose heart was clearly barren of the very love preached from that pulpit. The usher, a man named Mr. Thompson, had a smug satisfaction on his face. His chest puffed out. He walked a step ahead, as if clearing a path, as if we were contagion. His hand gestured vaguely towards the doors, a silent command for us to quicken our pace. I felt a surge of hot anger. My fists clenched. I wanted to turn around, to yell, to demand an explanation, to shame them. But my mother's hand, still firm on Maya's, seemed to vibrate with a silent command of its own. Dignity. We reached the heavy oak doors. Mr. Thompson pushed one open with an unnecessary flourish. The bright sunlight outside felt harsh after the dim interior. It hit us like a spotlight, exposing our raw humiliation to the world beyond the church walls. We stepped out onto the wide stone path. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass. People were just starting to arrive for the late service, dressed in their Sunday best. Their greetings faltered as they saw us, saw Mr. Thompson, saw the shame etched on our faces. Some looked away quickly, others stared openly, their curiosity laced with judgment. Whispers followed us down the steps, a quiet chorus of condemnation. My mother didn't once look back. Her gaze was fixed ahead, distant, yet intensely focused. She walked with a quiet determination, her head held high. Her silence was louder than any shout. It was a silence that spoke of pain, yes, but also of a burgeoning resolve, a deep, unshakable conviction. We reached our car. My father opened the door for my mother and Maya. I slid into the back seat, still feeling the eyes on us. The engine rumbled to life. As my father pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced at my mother in the passenger seat. She was staring out the window, her profile etched against the passing trees. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her purse. She wasn't crying. There were no tears, just a quiet fire smoldering in her eyes, a fire I had never seen before, a dangerous, determined glow. I knew even then that something had irrevocably shifted. This wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. And I knew my mother. She wasn't one to simply retreat. We drove in silence. The city streets blurred outside. The Sunday morning quiet was broken only by the hum of the engine and the beating of my own anxious heart. I wondered what she was thinking. What intricate tapestry of justice was beginning to weave itself in her mind? I wondered, too, if this was the end of our faith in that place, or just the beginning of a different kind of faith, a faith in ourselves. The car pulled into our driveway. The familiar comfort of our home felt like a fragile shield. We stepped inside, the weight of the morning still clinging to us like a shroud. My mother walked straight to the living room. She sat on the sofa, still clutching her purse. Her eyes, still holding that dangerous glint, met mine. A silent promise passed between us. The game had changed, and she was about to play. The usher's voice cut through the hymn, sharp and unyielding. "You need to leave, now." Michael flinched. His small hand, clutching mine, trembled. I could feel every eye on us, 100 whispers, like dry leaves rustling through brittle branches, each one a judgment. My heart pounded, a drum against my ribs, not from fear, but from a burning cold anger that settled deep in my bones. "But we haven't done anything," Michael whispered, his voice thin with confusion, a plea for reason. The usher, Brother Thomas, puffed out his chest, asserting his petty authority. His gaze was fixed, not on my son's innocence, but on something else, something he thought he saw in us, something he disliked. "This is a house of God," he declared, his voice carrying further now. echoing in the hushed reverence. We expect reverence, order. He gestured vaguely at Michael's fidgeting, at my slightly worn handbag, as if these were grave offenses, as if they were proof of our unworthiness. And respect, he added, looking directly into my eyes, challenging me. His stare was a gauntlet thrown. My grip tightened on Michael's hand, a silent promise of protection. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, the one that came when someone judged you before they even knew your name, the one that reminded me of all the other times. But not here, not now, not in God's house, not in this house. We are respectful, I said, my voice low, steady. I wouldn't let him hear the tremor, the hurt that pricked at me. We are here to worship, he scoffed, a small dismissive sound that somehow echoed louder than any shout in the quiet sanctuary. It was a sound of absolute contempt. Your presence is disruptive, he stated, his face hardening, sealing our fate. I'm afraid I must insist. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over us. A tangible barrier, a wall erected between us and the warmth of the community within. From the corner of my eye, I saw heads turn. Some congregation members looked away, embarrassed, unable to meet my gaze. Others stared, morbidly curious, feasting on our public humiliation. No one spoke up. No one intervened. Not a single person. It was just us, alone, in a crowded room of strangers, witnessing our quiet expulsion. A wave of despair washed over me, brief but potent. This wasn't just about an overzealous usher. This was about a system, a quiet understanding that some people just didn't belong, that we didn't belong. Michael tugged at my hand again. Mom, what's happening? His voice was a fragile thread. His innocent question was a knife in my chest. How do you explain prejudice to a child? How do you tell him that some people will hate you just for the color of your skin? How do you shield him from a world that judges so cruelly? I knelt down, bringing my face close to his. My smile was brittle, a fragile mask. It's okay, baby. We're just going to step outside for a moment. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, mirroring my pain. He knew. Children always knew. He saw the tension in my jaw, the forced lightness in my tone, the sadness I tried to hide. I stood up slowly, keeping my composure, dignity. That was all I had left in that moment. It was a shield against their scorn. Very well, I said to Brother Thomas, my voice a whisper of steel. If that is what you insist. He nodded, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had upheld order. He turned, leading the way towards the heavy oak doors at the back of the church. The path felt endless. We followed. Michael's steps were small, hesitant, each one a struggle. Mine were deliberate, each one a quiet act of defiance against the injustice. The walk felt like an eternity. The organ music, which had seemed so uplifting moments before, now sounded like a slow, mournful funeral dirge, playing for our discarded dignity. I could feel the weight of their stares on my back, the judgment, the relief of some that the disruption was being handled, the silent complicity of the rest. As we approached the doors, the senior pastor, Pastor Davies, emerged from a side office, looking perplexed by the scene. He had just finished greeting a family, a wide, welcoming smile still lingering on his face. His smile faltered when he saw us being escorted by Brother Thomas. His brow furrowed. "Brother Thomas, is there a problem?" he asked, his voice laced with concern, but still a distant formal query. Brother Thomas straightened, puffing up even more. "Just a minor misunderstanding, Pastor," ensuring decorum. He made it sound like I was an unwelcome stain. Pastor Davis' gaze shifted to me. I knew he didn't recognize me. Not after all these years. Not in this Sunday dress, standing here, humiliated, reduced to an incident. He saw only another black woman being ushered out, another face in the crowd, easily dismissed. I met his eyes directly, a silent plea, a silent challenge, a desperate hope that he would see beyond the surface. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly, a sigh escaping his lips. Ah, yes, decorum is important. His words sealed it. Even the pastor, the shepherd of this flock, the spiritual leader, had bought into the unspoken narrative. He had chosen order over humanity. My heart twisted. It wasn't just Brother Thomas. It was woven into the very fabric of this place, a deep, insidious thread of prejudice. We stepped out of the church, into the harsh glare of the morning sun. The air was cool, but I felt a burning heat on my face, a blush of shame and indignation. Michael looked back at the closed doors, his lower lip trembling, his small world suddenly made cruel. "Mommy, why couldn't we stay?" he asked, tears welling in his eyes, his voice cracking with hurt. I knelt again, pulling him into a tight embrace. His small body shook with suppressed sobs, and I held him close, wishing I could absorb all his pain. "Because sometimes, baby," I whispered into his hair, "people don't see with their hearts, they only see with their eyes. And sometimes their eyes are blind." My mind raced back, years ago, to a blueprint spread across my dining room table, to long nights spent poring over designs, meticulously planning every detail, to meetings with architects and contractors, explaining my vision, pushing for quality, for beauty, for accessibility, to the countless hours I poured into fundraising, organizing, overseeing every single step, the endless negotiations, the sheer amount of physical and emotional work, and the money, my money, every single brick, every stained glass window depicting saints, every polished pew, every rafter in that magnificent ceiling. I had personally ensured the best sound system, the most comfortable seating, the most welcoming entrance. I had envisioned this church as a beacon, sanctuary for everyone, a place where all were welcome, regardless of background, regardless of appearance, regardless of the color of their skin, a monument to faith and community, a legacy for generations, a place where my son and all children would feel safe and loved. And now I stood outside it, my heart aching with a pain deeper than any physical blow, a betrayal that cut to the very core of my being. My son, innocent and confused, stood beside me, shunned, rejected, and humiliated by the very walls I had helped erect. The injustice was a physical weight, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I looked at the grand facade, the towering steeple reaching towards the sky, mocking me with its silent grandeur. It was supposed to be a symbol of hope. It had become a symbol of exclusion, a monument to hypocrisy. A quiet storm brewed inside me, a resolve solidified, sharp and unbreakable. This humiliation, this insult to my son, this desecration of my vision, it would not stand, not for a moment longer. They had kicked his black family out of my church. The audacity was breathtaking. Right there, standing on the sidewalk, with my son's small, tear-stained hand in mine, a fierce determination took root. I wouldn't just leave. I wouldn't just walk away and let this injustice fester. They needed to understand. They needed to remember exactly who I was. And I would be the one to remind them. But not yet. Not here, on the street, where my words would be lost to the wind. This would need to be done with purpose, with impact, with a quiet, undeniable power, with the full weight of the truth. I wiped Michael's tears with my thumb, offering a strength I barely felt. Come on, baby, let's go home. We walked away from the church, away from the Sunday service, away from the place that had just rejected us in such a cruel public manner. But as I walked, I wasn't leaving defeat behind. I was carrying a promise that this story was far from over, a promise that the next time I stepped foot in that church, it would be on my terms, and they would not only listen, they would remember, and they would regret. The silence in our house felt heavy, heavier than any sermon, heavier than any judgment. It was the silence of a wound, fresh and throbbing. My children, usually so bright, moved through the days like shadows. Their laughter was gone, their trust in the world shattered. I watched them. My heart ached with a pain deeper than anything I'd felt in years. This wasn't just an insult to me. It was an attack on their innocence, their sense of belonging. They had been taught that church was a sanctuary, a place of love. Now it was just another place where they learned they weren't welcome because of the color of their skin. I couldn't let that stand. Not for them. Not for us. The quiet anger that had settled inside me wasn't cold. It was burning, a slow, steady fire. I had built a life on defying expectations, on turning adversity into opportunity. This, I decided, would be no different. I started small. I made calls to people who had known me in a different life, a life before I stepped back from the corporate world to focus on family. People who knew my reputation, my capabilities, my resources. They were surprised to hear from me. My voice, I realized, still carried a certain weight. The first few conversations were tentative. I described what had happened, the public humiliation, the usher's face, a mask of contempt, the pastor's quick dismissal. Each word felt like reopening the wound, but it also fueled the fire. The disbelief on the other end of the line was palpable. They knew me. They knew I wasn't one to exaggerate. One contact, an old associate from my real estate development days, listened intently. "Are you sure, Helen?" he asked. "A church? This sounds unprecedented." "It happened, Mark," I told him, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. "And I need to understand everything, every legal avenue, every financial detail, every contract." He understood. He knew I left no stone unturned. He promised to look into some things for me, specifically property deeds, building permits, funding records. He didn't ask why. He just knew I had a reason, a powerful one. Meanwhile, I tried to approach the church again. Officially, I wrote a formal letter, polite but firm. I detailed the incident. I requested a meeting with the full church board, not just the pastor. I wanted accountability, an apology at least, a recognition of the harm caused. Their response came a week later, a short, dismissive letter from the pastor's office. It expressed regret for any misunderstanding. It called the incident an unfortunate miscommunication. It offered no apology, no meeting, no recognition of racism. It simply reiterated that the usher was acting within his duties and that the church reserves the right to maintain order. It effectively called us liars and troublemakers. My hands trembled as I read it. The condescension, the casual cruelty. It was a second slap in the face, a confirmation that they believed they were untouchable, that they could treat people this way and face no consequences. My children's hurt flashed before my eyes again. My own humiliation returned. But this time, it hardened something inside me. My quiet fire was now ablaze. I looked at my husband, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. He saw the resolve in my eyes. "They think they can brush us aside," I said, my voice low. "They think we're just another complaint, another family they can make disappear." He reached for my hand. "What are you going to do, Helen?" I squeezed his hand tightly. "I'm going to remind them who I am," I said, "and what I'm capable of." I pulled out an old box from the attic. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light as I opened it. Inside, carefully preserved, were blueprints, old financial statements, correspondence with architects, bank transfer, records, documents spanning years, from before the first stone of that church was ever laid. They were all labeled with my name, my company's name. The evidence was undeniable. The truth was written in black and white. Every brick, every beam, every penny they had forgotten, or perhaps they never even knew. They saw me as just a black woman, a mother, someone to be ignored, disrespected, ejected. But I wasn't just a black woman. I was the black woman who had built their sanctuary from the ground up. And now I was ready to remind them, not with words, but with actions that would shake their very foundation. I called Mark again. My voice was calm, clear. "Mark," I said, "I need you to prepare something for me. Something formal, something comprehensive. We're going to hold them accountable, and we're going to do it in a way they will never forget." The usher, Mr. Henderson, seemed to puff himself up. His chest swelled with a misguided sense of righteousness. His voice, once a harsh whisper, now boomed. "This is a house of God, not a playground for your disrespect." My mother, Eleanor, stood perfectly still. Her hands, clasped in front of her, were steady, but I saw the subtle tremor in her jaw. The humiliation was a raw wound, exposed for all to see. People in the pews shifted, some whispering, others openly staring. A few averted their eyes, embarrassed for us. More for themselves, maybe. Mr. Henderson pointed toward the exit. "Out, now, before I call security." Security in a church. My stomach turned. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. It was about making an example. And we were that example. My younger sister, Sarah, started to cry softly. She clutched my mother's skirt. My father put an arm around Sarah, his face a mask of controlled rage. He looked at my mother, his silent question hanging in the air. "What do we do?" Eleanor met his gaze, and then something shifted in her eyes. The quiet pain, the deep hurt began to recede, replaced by a cold, unwavering fire. A look I'd seen only a few times in my life. The look of a woman who had reached her absolute limit. She took a deep breath. Her voice, when it came, was soft, almost a murmur. Yet it cut through the murmuring congregation. "Mr. Henderson!" He stopped, mid-sentence of another threat. He was taken aback by her addressing him so directly, so calmly. "What is it?" he snapped. "You speak of disrespect," she continued, her voice gaining a fraction of its usual strength. "You speak of a house of God." She paused, letting the words hang. "Do you truly understand what that means?" He scoffed. "I understand enough to know you don't belong here, disrupting the service." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Disrupting the service? Or disrupting your perception of who belongs?" A few gasps rippled through the pews. Even Mr. Henderson seemed momentarily stunned. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had just publicly shamed. "This is not a debate," he declared, regaining his bluster. "Leave, immediately." "I will leave," my mother said. Her voice was still soft, but the steel was unmistakable now. "But not before I ask you something." He rolled his eyes. "What could you possibly have to ask that is relevant to this situation?" "It is very relevant," she replied. She looked not just at Mr. Henderson, but at the entire congregation. Her gaze swept over the stained glass windows, the polished wooden pews, the ornate altar. "Do you know who laid the first stone of this very building?" Silence descended. A thick, heavy silence. Mr. Henderson looked utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "Do you know the sacrifices made?" She pressed on. Her eyes were fixed on his, piercing through his facade of arrogance. The sweat, the tears, the sleepless nights, the faith it took to see this vision through. His mouth opened and closed. He looked around, as if searching for someone to rescue him. No one spoke. The entire church was captivated by my mother's quiet intensity. I watched her, a sudden realization dawning on me. My mother never spoke about her past struggles, unless absolutely necessary. But now, her words were laced with a history I was only just beginning to grasp. I remembered snippets from my childhood: late nights, early mornings, phone calls with contractors, blueprints spread across our dining table, a distant memory of a groundbreaking ceremony, a small shovel in her hand. But I had been too young to connect it this, to this church. This, this is irrelevant, Mr. Henderson finally managed to stutter. He was sweating now. His bravado was cracking. "Irrelevant?" Eleanor repeated, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. But it was not a joyful smile. It was a dangerous smile. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Henderson, it is the most relevant thing of all." She took a step forward. The usher instinctively recoiled a step. The power dynamics were visibly shifting. His face, once smug, was now etched with confusion and a hint of fear. He saw the shift too. Everyone did. "You stand here," she said, her voice rising slightly clear and resonant, "in a place built on faith, on community, on love, and you use it to inflict pain, to judge, to exclude." "I am merely upholding the rules," he blurted out, desperate to cling to his authority. "Whose rules?" she challenged, her voice like a whip. "God's, or your own small prejudiced ones?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye was on my mother. My heart pounded in my chest. I felt a surge of pride, mixed with a profound sense of foreboding. She was not just speaking, she was delivering an indictment, and she was about to deliver something far, far greater. The air in the church was thick with anticipation. It felt like the entire foundation of the building was vibrating. The truth was poised, ready to shatter their carefully constructed illusion. She looked directly at Mr. Henderson, then beyond him, to where the head pastor usually sat. "I believe it's time," she declared, her voice now perfectly calm, perfectly strong, "for everyone here to understand exactly who they have just thrown out." She turned her gaze back to the stunned usher, her eyes glinting. "Because you, Mr. Henderson, have just ejected the very woman who gave this church its home." The words hung in the air, a thunderclap without sound. The implications rippled through the congregation, a collective gasp. Mr. Henderson's face went white. The part of the story I had known, but never fully understood, was about to be laid bare. What would happen next? The silence in our home felt heavier than the public shame. We sat, a family shell-shocked. But my resolve, it hardened with every quiet breath. I looked at my children, their faces still etched with the pain of that Sunday. Their mother, their grandmother, had built a sanctuary, and that sanctuary had just spit them out. My heart ached, not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment. All those years, all that sacrifice. It wasn't just money, it was belief. It was a vision for a place where everyone felt welcome, a place of true fellowship. "They've forgotten," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My son, David, reached for my hand. "They never knew, Mom," he corrected gently, "or they chose to forget." I shook my head. "No, they will remember." My decision was made. There was no turning back from this. The humiliation, was not just ours. It was a stain on the very foundation of what that church was meant to be. I pulled out my old leather-bound notebook. Inside were names, numbers, dates, the blueprint of my life, interwoven with the blueprint of that building. I need to make some calls, I told them. My voice was calm, steady. The storm was over for us. Now, the storm would begin for them. First, I called Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. He knew my story, knew my history with the church better than anyone. "Clara," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I am fine, Robert," I told him. "But the church is not. I need you to prepare the documents." He knew what documents I meant. The original incorporation papers, the construction contracts, the deeds, the bank statements detailing the millions of dollars I had poured into that dream. Then I called my architect, Mrs. Jenkins. She had helped bring my vision to life. "I need a copy of the original architectural plans," I requested, "with all my annotations." She remembered every single detail, every change, every late-night call. "For what purpose, Clara?" she asked. "For clarity," I responded simply. Meanwhile, at the church a flurry began. The usher, Mr. Thompson, had been boasting about his decisive action. The pastor, Reverend Miller, had initially dismissed it as a minor incident, a simple misunderstanding. But then, an anonymous email arrived at the church office. It contained a grainy photo of me, an old photo, a photo of me breaking ground, shovel in hand. The email simply read, "Do you know who you just ejected?" Reverend Miller felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He called Mrs. Davies, the church administrator, into his office. "Who is this woman?" he demanded, pointing to the image on his screen. Mrs. Davies, a long-time employee, squinted at the photo. Her eyes widened. "Reverend," she breathed, "that's Mrs. Johnson, Clara Johnson." "And who is Clara Johnson?" he asked impatiently. Mrs. Davies swallowed hard. She's the one who built this church, Reverend." The air in the office grew heavy. Reverend Miller's face went pale. He hadn't seen me in years, had never truly known the extent of my contribution. He immediately tried to call me. My phone rang, but I let it ring. I was busy, preparing. The next call was to a local community news channel. Not for an interview, not yet. Just a quiet inquiry. A heads up. "I have a story that might interest you," I said to the assignment editor. "A story about faith, community, and forgotten legacies." I kept my words vague, but my tone carried a weight that made her listen intently. I hung up the phone. My work was just beginning. The church had forgotten its foundation, both literally and spiritually. It was time to remind them. And soon, everyone would know. The usher, Mark, stood rigid, his face a mask of self-righteousness. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you'll have to leave. Your family is disrupting the service." His voice was loud enough to carry through the quiet sanctuary. Pastor Davies from the pulpit looked on with a troubled expression, but offered no immediate intervention. David clutched my hand tighter, his small face etched with confusion and hurt. Marcus was a tower of restrained fury beside me, his jaw clenched. But my eyes were fixed on Mark, and then, slowly, deliberately, I turned to face the entire congregation. The murmurs had ceased. All eyes were on us. I took a deep breath, the scent of old wood and worn hymn books filling my lungs. This church, this sanctuary, had been my solace, my hope. "Disrupting the service?" My voice was calm, a low murmur that somehow commanded attention. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with a quiet power that seemed to ripple through the pews. "Is that what you call it, Mark?" he faltered, surprised by my direct address. "Ma'am, I've already asked you." I raised a hand, not in anger, but in a gesture of definitive halt. My gaze swept across the faces, some sympathetic, some merely curious, some clearly uncomfortable. I saw the eyes of Sister Beatrice, who had known me for decades, widen in understanding. "This church," I began, each word a slow, heavy stone placed upon the silence, "was built on a promise of refuge, a promise of community, a promise of love." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "It was built on dreams, my late husband's dreams." Mark shifted uncomfortably, bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Pastor Davies finally stirred, stepping forward slightly, a question forming on his lips. "Many years ago," I continued, my gaze now resting squarely on Pastor Davies, "when this land was just a vacant lot, and the congregation was meeting in a rented hall, a need arose. A need for a permanent home, a need for a place that truly belonged to us, to everyone." I looked back at Mark, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "You see, Mark, this place isn't just a building. It's a testament. A testament to faith, yes, but also a testament to sacrifice." His eyes narrowed, clearly not grasping my meaning. "With all due respect, ma'am, I don't see what this has to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," I interrupted, my voice still level, but with an edge of steel. "Because before a single brick was laid, before a single beam was raised, before the first plans were even drawn, there was a quiet pledge, a significant donation, a commitment that made this entire structure possible." The silence in the church was absolute now. You could almost hear the thoughts forming, the dawning comprehension slowly spreading. Marcus squeezed my arm, a silent affirmation of support. David, sensing the profound shift, just looked up at me, his eyes wide. "My husband, Thomas, and I, we believed in this vision with every fiber of our being," I stated, my voice gaining strength. "We understood the cost, the financial cost, the emotional cost. We decided that no family, no individual should ever feel unwelcome here, that this church would be a beacon, open to all, without judgment or prejudice." I turned fully to Pastor Davies, who looked utterly bewildered, his brow furrowed in confusion, then dawning recognition. His eyes darted to Sister Beatrice, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps the church records need a refresher, Pastor," I said, my voice cutting through the remaining uncertainty. "Perhaps the ushering team needs to understand the true foundation upon which they stand. Because I, Eleanor Vance, along with my late husband Thomas, provided the initial and most substantial donation that purchased this land and constructed this entire building." A gasp rippled through the congregation. It was a collective exhale of shock, of disbelief, of sudden, profound understanding. Mark's face went from pale to ashen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes, fixed on me, were filled with a dawning horror. "This church," I declared, my voice now echoing with the authority of ownership, of creation, "was built with my money, my time, my heart. Every beam, every window, every pew you sit on represents a piece of my family's legacy. So, when you ask my family to leave, Mark," I looked directly at him, "you are asking the very foundation of this church to walk out." Pastor Davies stammered, his face a mixture of fear and embarrassment. "Sister Vance, I was not aware of the full extent of—" "The full extent, Pastor, is that this is my home. This is our home," I corrected, gesturing to Marcus and David. "And frankly, I find it deeply disturbing that the very values of inclusivity and welcome we championed have been so carelessly forgotten." Mark started to back away, visibly shaking. His self-assured posture crumbled. The power had shifted, irrevocably, dramatically. He was no longer the gatekeeper. He was an intruder on sacred ground, an aggressor against its very creator. I will not have my family humiliated in the house that we helped build, I stated, my voice firm and unwavering. Not by a volunteer, nor by anyone else who forgets the true meaning of this sacred space. My gaze swept the stunned faces of the congregation. This church was meant to uplift, not to cast down, to embrace, not to eject. I turned back to Pastor Davies, whose face was now a mask of frantic apology. Pastor, a conversation needs to be had, immediately, about what this church truly stands for, and about who is allowed to enforce its values. The service was well and truly disrupted now, but not by my family's quiet presence. It was disrupted by the truth finally, powerfully revealed. The room was buzzing with whispers, with the rustle of people shifting in their seats, looking at Mark, then at the pastor, then at me with newfound respect and awe. I took David's hand, and Marcus placed a hand gently on my shoulder. We didn't leave. Not yet. This was our space, our legacy, and it was time to reclaim it. The air in the sanctuary was thick. You could feel it, heavy and charged. My mother stood there, not moving a muscle, but her presence filled every corner. The usher, Mr. Davies, looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face, once sneering, was now a ghastly shade of pale, his mouth agape. The pastor, Reverend Miller, stood frozen behind the pulpit, his usual booming voice utterly silenced. My mother's voice, though quiet, was clearer than any sermon. "I bought the land," she repeated, her gaze sweeping over the shocked faces. "I drew the blueprints. I found the contractors. I poured every penny I had, and then some, into this place. Not for my name to be on a plaque, but for a sanctuary, for a true house of God." A ripple went through the congregation. Whispers erupted, then hushed quickly as her eyes landed on Mr. Davies again. His arrogance had crumbled. He was just a small man, lost and exposed. "And you," she continued, her voice gaining a steel edge, "you turned it into a gate where you could judge and exclude. You shamed my children. You shamed this family for no reason but the color of our skin." She didn't raise her voice, but her words were like hammer blows, each one landing with absolute precision. Reverend Miller finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Sister Eleanor, I had no idea." My mother turned to him, her expression a mix of sorrow and disappointment. "No idea, Reverend. Or perhaps you simply chose not to. See? This intolerance, this prejudice, it didn't just appear today. It was allowed to fester. It was given a seat at the table. And today, it tried to throw out the very foundation upon which this table rests." The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of her words pressed down on everyone. People were shifting in their pews, avoiding eye contact. Some of the older women began to dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. They knew my mother. They knew her quiet generosity, her consistent faith. "This is not the house I built," she declared, her voice firm. "This is not the community I envisioned. A church that turns away God's children is not a church at all. It is merely a building." Then she delivered her decree, not with anger, but with an unwavering resolve that was far more powerful. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "you are no longer welcome to serve in this capacity or any capacity within these walls. Your heart is not aligned with the spirit of this place." His knees buckled slightly. He tried to protest, a pathetic squeak escaping his lips, but no words formed. He just stood there, publicly shamed, utterly defeated. Then she looked at Reverend Miller. "Reverend, this institution needs to reflect on what it truly stands for. It needs to remember its purpose. And until it does, until the very air in this place is cleansed of such prejudice and judgment, my family and I cannot be a part of it. My heart ached, but I also felt a surge of pride so strong it made my chest ache. She wasn't just walking away. She was making a stand. She was demanding more, not just for us but for everyone who might ever feel unwelcome. She turned to us, her children, and a gentle smile touched her lips. It was a smile of peace, of quiet victory. "Come, my loves," she said, her hand reaching for mine. "We came seeking fellowship, and we found something else entirely. But we found our strength. We found our voice." As we turned to leave, walking slowly down the aisle, the congregation parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to stop us. No one even dared to look directly at us. We walked past Mr. Davies, a broken figure, staring at the floor. We walked past Reverend Miller, his face a mask of shame and regret. The doors, which had been slammed in our faces just moments ago, now seemed to open for us. But this time, it was by our own choice that we stepped out. The sunlight outside felt different. It felt like freedom. It felt like a new beginning. My mother had not just revealed her power. She had redefined it. She showed us that true power wasn't about ownership, but about integrity. And that, sometimes, the loudest statement is made in the quietest departure. The church stood behind us, a monument to a moment of revelation. But we carried the true spirit of justice within us. My mother had built a foundation far stronger than any stone.